Hi, and welcome to the Kite Channel Lounge, the cybersecurity podcast, dodging the vendor sales pitches and delivering genuine insights, news, and predictions. Hopefully, we're going to have a lot of fun on the way too. I'm your host, Stuart Nan Clark. Today's podcast is entitled The Secure Edge, and we're going to look at data, AI, and the modern perimeter. I'm joined by Skyhigh today by Burnett and Julian Ryan. How you doing, guys?
Very good. Good to be here.
Fantastic. Yeah. Is this your first podcast?
Indeed it is. Be gentle.
Yeah, Freddie's first one as well.
It's a little bit daunting, isn't it? The surroundings.
It's a nice studio, though.
It's lovely.
Yeah, very comfortable.
Right. Before we jump in then, let's get a little bit of background on yourselves. So, Julian, let's start with yourself. How do you find yourself here today?
Totally by accident. So I originated in reseller land and then progressed to set up my own business twice. Throughout all of that, though, I was always aligned very much to security and ended up consulting for McAfee Enterprise, who were then to become Trellix and Skyhigh.
Fantastic.
So yeah, we talked about rugby actually. I remembered that's how I got started as a in reseller land. I was playing at London Scottish down in Richmond, and there were quite a few IT guys on the team, and one guy was the sales director at Morse, and there was another guy who was sales director at Computer Centre. So I was able to weave my way into to Morse Group. That was the first company I started as. Through that introduction down at London Scottish.
Yeah, it's fantastic. You know, every time we have a different guest into the studio, we all end up in the same industry, in the same place, but almost all by accident.
Indeed.
Right, so let's take a bit of a deep dive into Skyhigh Security. I think that some of our listeners will be aware of Skyhigh Security as there are today, but there's a big back journey, let's call it. So let's roll back the clock and again, how does Skyhigh Security find themselves here today?
So Skyhigh were the first CASB vendor back in 2011, first vendor on the market. So that allowed them to develop a lot of their API, native integrations. And then were purchased, I believe, around 2015 by McAfee Enterprise. Again, it's very much a kind of niche product, but fitted alongside the kind of proxy, and a lot of the DLP technologies had a lot of synergy. McAfee Enterprise, of course, then got sold off, split into Trellix and Skyhigh Security. So sister companies, we still share a CEO. There's still a lot of synergy between the two businesses. And we became, all those technologies merged into an SSE vendor.
Fantastic. Now, you've just mentioned SSE, and I think one of the things that I'm really conscious of, especially as we started this this podcast series, is the use of acronyms. I think with our, within our industry, there's hundreds, and we're going to, InfoSec is every year, and you go around, there's a different acronym every year. So let's again take a step back. SSE, what is it? And I think specifically for me as well, it can sometimes be just put into the same container as SASE. So, yeah, let's just unpick that a little bit.
So,
assume nothing.
Sure. Okay, so from a Skyhigh perspective, we specialise in securing data. That's where we are number one. And we think about the control points. Where are we going to secure the data? How are we going to secure the data? Primarily for many SSE solutions, as a concept, you're looking at web traffic and you're looking at data that resides in the cloud. Mostly static, but you could include, certainly these days, email within there. And it's really a suite of products to provide all of the connectivity and all of the necessary controls from certainly a Skyhigh perspective to secure that data using a zero trust principle. And as part of that, we kind of have some key components. So we have our API integrations that can protect data within the cloud services. We have proxy servers on-prem and cloud that can provide real-time protection, so we can stop data hitting a particular target in real time. which, as I'm sure we'll come to see, is absolutely vital. And then we provide access to private applications. The difference, I guess, between SSE and SASE will be some of the connectivity pieces. Primarily, we're really just concerned with IPsec tunnels and GRE tunnels. So, we've been working with those at Skyhigh for years. I've worked with Cisco for a native integration. That's really the key difference as to whether the provider supplies those IPsec tunnels or GRE tunnels. They're just a standard protocol.
I think, yeah, you're exactly right, Julian. I think, in 2026, though, what we now see, what we're faced with, it's not just about creating a perimeter around an organization. Yeah, it's actually protecting the data wherever it exists. When people are at home, when people are, sending information out or trying to process stuff, in AI. So it's more about the data, and organizations care about that, not just building a moat around a castle.
Indeed.
Oh, totally. So let's kind of double down into that. We mentioned data a lot within the first few minutes of this podcast. So when we speak to your team, we hear data first a lot.
Indeed.
What does that really mean?
So different vendors will take a different approach. When we're talking to our customers want to protect their so-called crown jewels. And what are most of the crown jewels? Certainly for most organizations, it's the data within their databases. Now, sure, we can take a zero trust approach, so we can control access to those sources. We can step up different levels of authentication. We can put very granular access controls within there. But ultimately, what we don't want is that data to get into the wrong hands. And this is where that data first approach comes from. And also making those protections as simple and as easy as possible. So they're very prone to false positives in putting any of these kind of controls in. So what we want is a simple, easy, light touch approach, which is as effective as possible, that reduces those false positives to an absolute minimum.
Totally.
I think, Stuart, why that's relevant and kind of why it matters is, Skyhigh, currently 80% of the world's global banks, are customers of Skyhigh. And I think 25% of data in the FTSE 250 is protected by Skyhigh. So, we've been around for a long time. We've done it with a lot of people, and bring that kind of data protection to a wide range of customers, and those type of customers, the banks, the large enterprise, and also obviously the government type customers, organizations that we protect. Yeah,
definitely. And Marcus, I want to pick up on a point that you made around the castle and moat, right? I think essentially the perimeter's changed. And so why do you think that old model, let's call it, of the castle and moat, why is that approach failing?
I think, it's the way we're working, isn't it? We need flexibility. No one wants to, you want to be able to use data, at all times in your job. Yeah, our customers are doing that. They're, and amazing, we're either in the office or we're going home. We all have access to other systems. If something's not working for you, you jump on your private laptop, or you do some stuff on your phone. So it's about accepting the migration for applications to cloud is there, and the protection's really got to protect the fact that applications are going to be accessed everywhere by everyone. So for me, I think that's the challenge that organizations have. But Julian, I don't know if you...
It's a natural evolution, we're on a journey. So, I can certainly remember, 20 years ago, everyone's in the office, all their traffic is controlled by an on-prem proxy server. Yeah. No, it was great, it worked. It mitigated the threats in a proportional manner at the time. Moving forward, we'd have road warriors. So we'd have, salespeople often with laptops going out on the road, and they wouldn't enjoy the same protection as you might do if you're inside of the network. And so we started to implement hybrid solutions to provide a similar experience for those and levels of protection for those kind of use cases. Ultimately, though, we've turned into a much larger hybrid workforce, and not only that, but providing protections on-prem is only part of the picture these days. And actually, most of your workforce is mobile, which a lot of organisations are. You also have some organisations with air-gapped networks with large on-prem presence. And it's really about being adaptive, having that adaptive architecture to be able to mitigate those threats in a proportional manner. And at the same time, all your data has moved from predominantly being on-prem to a lot in the cloud. And now over the, certainly with COVID, there was a massive push to run for cloud services, and we're finding that being pulled back now. So there's a lot of questions around data sovereignty, how we protect that data. And now it's reflected in AI as well. So, there's a lot of businesses using public AI, but now a lot of that is also being brought back into private AI as well. So this is a constant journey and a constant change in our product sets to innovate to address those threats.
That's a really great answer, and I think it's given a lot of context to that conversation as well, which is so key when we look at the Skyhigh security platform.
Yeah.
Right, so let's look at the unified SSE approach. And you mentioned it at the top there, really, secure web gateway, CASB, secure ZTNA and DLP, right? So why does unification really matter? And I guess, why would an enterprise go down this route rather than point products?
So we can have another history lesson here. Best of breed always used to be the way, I want the best web filtering solution. I want the best DLP. And you'd probably go out to multiple vendors and try to plug it all in. There's a lot of reliance on APIs. It's complex and it's difficult. It's difficult to manage and it's difficult to operate. And you end up with not much synergy between the products. Now, of course, we take a data-centric approach anyway. So, DLP is at the core of everything that we do. Because we can align all of these different products to protect the web traffic in real time, to protect your private application traffic in real time, to protect the data in your cloud service providers as well. Having a single set of classifications, a single DLP policy, a single set of controls means, sure, you've got some hard work when you start up. You always will do, whether that's with a best of breed solution or with a integrated SSE type solution. But once you start building out from there, adding in additional protection to other cloud service providers, building that protection into your proxy traffic, into your web traffic, into your private access traffic, into your ZTNA traffic, all becomes so much easier. And then you end up with one policy to manage, one single pane of glass. It's much easier from an operational perspective as well.
I was going to say, huge operational benefits to that, right?
Yeah. I was going to say, I mean, actually, it's interesting when you talk to, customers talking to customers, as an organization, obviously, the temptation is to have that conversation about one element of SSE. Feels like that's what you should do, but you're not really, the interesting thing with customers is all of those issues are interrelated as well. Yeah. So, the conversation isn't just, CASB isn't just our data posture management. It's kind of how things overlap. That is the conversation that not opens customers up, but where customers are, those are the problems they're having. Yeah, they're not having like these standalone problems. They're having a mixture of problems, and you don't always want to go in there and say, right, I'm going to answer it and position this technology. You want to have the conversation with them over. Often it's two or three of those things that are gonna resolve the issue, that they're trying to resolve, or improve things in the way they want to improve things.
No, I totally agree. Look, I think in my time in the industry, and we've seen how it evolved, that if you roll back the clock, there weren't that many options, as you said, right?
Yeah.
But now the amount of tools that we can throw at a problem, that's been the challenge, I think, for us as a channel, and we will chat on the channel later on. The channel's kind of responsibility within this market to not just throw more and more and more tools, but to take a strategic approach, stand back, really understand what outcomes we're trying to achieve, I think that's a huge piece. But we're almost trying to solve a challenge that we've created as well as a vendor community and as a channel community, right? I've just thrown tools at it. And I think, look, that market's going to get even more complex. So I'm going to mention it, AI.
Very hot topic.
Of course it is. And look, as I was doing my research for the podcast, I looked at one of the reports that Skyhigh Security put out last year in April 2025, the Cloud Adoption and Risk Report. And at the time, we're waiting for the next edition of this, but less than 10% of enterprises have implemented data protection policies for AI apps.
Indeed.
It's a massive window.
So it's an interesting use case. It represents a broader example, though, and it highlights where organisations have failed to address significant risks. So there's always going to be services where your employees could disseminate information, sensitive information, out of your organisation. That risk has been there for quite a long time, and employees are always very inventive as to, they've got a job to do, they've got deadlines. They'll go generally with the path of least resistance. If they need to share some sensitive information, often they'll find unique ways of doing that. So we kind of take a phased approach to this. AI is one particular example to that, because rather than just maybe sharing your sensitive information in Dropbox and then sharing a link, you can now disseminate information to a public platform that is easily accessible by the entire world. And that's a humongous risk. And it's also, certainly with AI, very specific risks as well. And those need, in part, that generic approach. So we address those more global kind of risks to the organization, but also some very specific AI type controls.
Totally. And again, the same report said, right, that 94% of all AI services are at risk from at least one of those top LLM risks. But the other bit that stuck out to me, and you just referenced it there, is 11% of all files that are uploaded into those AI apps include sensitive corporate content.
It's shocking.
So we talked about that there was always that risk there, but that's huge.
Yes, it's massive. And okay, we work from Skyhigh in highly regulated spaces often, but also well outside of there. Of course, within highly regulated organisations, they're forced to go down this road, and they're forced to address those. There's big financial penalties if there's any data leakage. I would also add there's also big financial penalties if there's any service outages, and I'm sure we'll come on to resilience further on down the line. But sticking to the topic, AI is a massive threat to all organisations with any sensitive information.
I mean, just to add to what Julian's saying, they're simple mistakes to make as individuals. You've got to, accept that, in some ways, it's to always be aware of what you're doing when you're interacting with AI is difficult. Yeah. You're working hard, you're trying to produce things. Our customers are, under pressure, and AI's, it's a great answer. If you want to process some data, I guess, HR, I can see instances, but I mean, even just, if you think about that temptation to click on an email in the middle of a day, that's an example of, we've all done it. Yeah, we've all clicked on that email instantly. You clicked on it, you knew, that was the wrong thing to do, but then, you get contacted by IT to tell you it was the wrong thing to do. You don't even have that guardrail, do you? When you're dealing with AI. Yeah. So, how much of the data you're putting in, if you're using spreadsheets, do you know what's in that spreadsheet? How granular can you do? And often, you might be in a situation where the customer's like, they knew they did the wrong thing, but it happened. Yeah. So Skyhigh is, how do you put the guardrails that they don't just do things, that we're helping people, still going to be just as efficient, still going to get the reports to, the business in time, but providing that guardrail that you don't hurt yourself by sharing, sensitive data.
Yeah, totally get it. And I think the term shadow IT was synonymous with CASB, right? It was
Yes.
so. I guess if we're going to shift that now to start talking about shadow AI, and I guess that visibility piece, in some we don't know it's a problem if you can't see it, and I guess this is where you guys can really play a part here.
Correct. So again, that's old school play of URL filtering. And sure, I still speak to customers who will say, have you got a category blocking for artificial intelligence? The answer is yes. If you don't want to use it, that's fine. And I do occasionally come across organizations like that. Even those that I'm speaking to now are starting, they're forced to row back on that. To be competitive, they have to be adopting these technologies. So we're there to make it safe. And the first part of that journey is to understand what services is the customer accessing. And shadow AI is part of that shadow IT story. So just being able to get visibility of what services are in use, who's using them, how much data is being transferred to them, and what risk do they pose to the organization. It just gives you the first part to creating your controls around what you want to allow, what you want to disallow, and then we can start talking about that data protection.
Totally. Anything to add there, Marcus?
No, I mean, that's a good point. I know there is things, Julian's leading on there. There's going to be further conversations I'm sure you're going to have where, talking about shadow browser, and how we move them forward into that, because that's obviously, based upon what Julian said there around, the guardrails, that becomes another point where, we have innovation that customers can really view the risk and manage it correctly in their
That's
businesses.
a fair comment. And talking about the risk, in a recent survey we had for your average organisation, we found they were using 320 different AI applications.
It's madness.
It's insane.
I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, just getting visibility of that and being able to put some risk-based controls. Real simple. Anything that's high risk, don't allow. It just gives you that start of the journey to protect your absolute basics, the 101s of security that a traditional proxy type approach couldn't address.
So I guess if we stay on this topic, and we've definitely come back to the remote browser piece as well, the answer is definitely not just to block, as you've touched on, and we're clearly on a journey with this when we look at the stats that are available and the reports that are available around this space. But I guess in the real world, have you got any user examples maybe of customers that are on this journey that could be referenced, or maybe projects where people have at least started the journey?
Oh, absolutely. So, we've got lots of customers out there who maybe they use a third-party proxy solution. They have some basic controls around their real-time web traffic, and they may already use us for shadow IT. Now, we've got this database. We've got 50,000 different applications out there, one of the largest databases, certainly in the industry, all categorized, all risk rated. And we can produce lists for consumption with your firewalls, with your proxy servers, obviously natively within our own proxy servers, to provide that blocking, that coaching to mitigate some of those risks.
I think, so yeah, if you move that to the kind of the business issue as well, so it makes for exceptionally busy SOCs, trying to control all these risks. So, doesn't matter what industry you're in, we've mentioned banking being a large one, any regulated market, is typically very aware of the risks involved. And actually, they all still have cost saving or cost optimization projects going on. I don't think I've spoken to or would come across an organization that isn't trying to reach some form of cost optimization at the moment. So there's only really two ways of optimizing that. One thing is either, it's how you save money. Obviously, there's still that, we want our customers to be innovators and they want to, increase revenue as well. But if you look at saving, cost optimization, it's, how efficient can you be in your SOC? We've got customers that have, reduced that noise by 95% in financial services. That means, you can realistically manage the risk, and it's not just a case of it would be impossible to employ enough people. If your risk shot up by a factor of X. Seen it many times, different organizations, and it's not always predicted where that noise is going to come. Often it does come from having a change in tooling and identifying a new risk. And it's actually not, on one hand, the spike in activity in the SOC is great news. It might mean that there is an identification of a risk, but how many of those are actually risks that you've now identified, or is it just you're now going through an ocean looking for a tiny speck to see, well, that is actually something we should be concerned about. And I think that has been in all of our great case studies, with like settlement services, even into media and these the advertising world, where they need to keep things certainly managed.
Yep.
Yeah. It's always around the number of kind of false positives that we can stop, and just the efficiency of the team to be able to do their job well
and scale, right?
Yeah.
So look, I think we all have to embrace AI, right? So the objective
Absolutely.
here is to really enable that secure AI adoption, right? That's what we're looking to
And
achieve.
this is the journey we're going on with the customers. So your first step is always visibility. That's really where Shadow IT, Shadow AI really comes in. And then we can build out from there based on the risk posed. And, one of the beauties with a lot of these technologies is they're risk centric. We can see where we need, it tells us where we need to start. It makes our job a lot easier. We can look at the noisiest stuff. We can look at the riskiest stuff, and then really quickly address those. And, once those all die down, we get the more interesting things come out the woodwork.
So I guess, look, if we just finish up on this subject, but if we were to take a look at, the role of which browser controls and DLP in terms of this AI piece play a part,
Yes.
Can we just comment on that?
It's going to be a fundamental part of the way we go forward. So traditionally, a lot of the controls have been outside of the endpoint, and for many types of controls, that's great, because that's where we want them to be. We can do really complex anti-malware. We can do really complex DLP. We couldn't put that on the endpoint. It's too resource intensive. However, the endpoint is kind of, it might be a less line of defense, which is, again, another reason why we like putting controls further down the line, but also it's the only place often that we see decrypted traffic, WebSockets being one example. So we recognize that there is a part to play in having some kind of browser integration. And I don't think Skyhigh as a business will have an appetite to create a browser that's a Skyhigh browser that we've got to distribute everywhere. We've got to test with our customers' applications. We've got to maintain. We've got to address vulnerabilities. Most secure enterprise browsers are based around a Chromium engine. Realistically, there'll probably be a couple of versions out of date, and that poses a risk to our customers. And instead, we can take a unique approach with this. So rather than having to own the browser itself, we can instead own the content of the browser. We're decrypting that traffic with our proxy servers. We have control of what the response is to a particular web request. In this example, we can inject custom code into there. That code is ingested by and executed by the browser. We can implement controls from a remote location. There's no management, minimal testing. It's just, again, it's another path of least resistance where our customers can adopt very simple controls to address a lot of the threats from AI, which are better placed on the endpoint.
I mean, the beauty is obviously, as employees don't know that they're working on a browser, an enterprise browser, secure browser. They can do the things they want. It doesn't force them into that sort of shadow browser issue. So there's no need for people to people are aware of it if they are on a browser that restricts them. So with this approach, you just won't notice.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge topic, right? The enterprise browser piece in general, and I
Yes.
think if as a user, talking about a user myself, right? If we were going to go and shift an organization of, let's say, 30,000 users uh, over to an enterprise browser away from Chrome or away from Safari, there's going to be challenges with it, right?
Adoption is the number one challenge, and that shouldn't be any surprise. We all know from our own experience, having your own browser with your own bookmarks, with your own plugins, with your own passwords stored in there, it's just how people work these days. You know, the browser's effectively your new operating system. Everybody's moved to cloud services. That's how we access them. So we need a simple, light touch approach to make that easy for the end user.
And there's always loopholes, isn't there, right?
Of course.
And they'll continue to be so. We'll find a way around.
Indeed.
So if we look at, we talked about how Skyhigh do it and take a slightly different approach. But if we look at RBI, you mentioned
Yes.
RBI, right? And the Secure Cloud Gateway, how can those two things help together?
So it's a very good question, especially in a secure enterprise browser context. So again, the endpoint is the last line of defense. Why would you want to rely on anything there to execute code on the hope that it's going to keep anything safe? We know, often secure enterprise browsers will have a sandbox within them, but we also know they have vulnerabilities. It should never touch the endpoint, in my opinion. It should always be executed somewhere else. And this is precisely what the RBI technology gives us. So we have within our Skyhigh platform, a set of virtual browsers that natively we can direct traffic to based on risk. So this is what we refer to as risky web RBI, where Skyhigh can decide that request, maybe it's going to a potentially malicious website, or maybe it's just a website that is uncategorized. We've never seen it before. So we can drive that traffic through to a remote browser. The browser, the code's not going to execute on the endpoint, therefore isn't going to pose a risk to the organization, but we still allow access to that website. We still let people continue working. And over and above that, then we have what we refer to as the full RBI, where the customer can choose when do they want to go into those full sessions, so full RBI sessions. So typically that might be an individual who's highly targeted. It might be developers who quite often go to websites that maybe pose a risk to the organisation, but we need to let them get on with doing their job.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think the important thing here is as well is, as you can tell, it's important to build this conversation up because it's all going to be unique to every customer that we talk about. So, good conversations with customers are understanding of across all of this, piece, where are their concerns? Where are they? What are they trying to address? And to build up with them from just the general understanding, but actually letting them talk. Always having a point of view. Clearly you can tell we have strong points of view. We have strong opinions on what customers should do, but at the same time as well, you've got to understand and respect that even within organizations, people have different responsibilities. So you might find on one day you're having one conversation, and then on another day you're having a different conversation, and we bring it together, and eventually through working with them, we give them an answer, as to how to manage things.
These are complex topics as well. I mean, they're very consultative conversations. So we have to work with our customers to understand where they are. We have to work with them to understand what kind of direction they've got, what pain points they've got, and help them along the whole journey. Customers aren't going to just come along and implement a DLP solution overnight. We're talking about working with our customers over years and longer.
I think that's how I was going to sum up that piece actually about the journey. And there's various different points that, any enterprise or channel partner, frankly, can join us on that journey. And it will either be a business challenge that comes up, or a point product. There'll be a requirement for a point product that opens up the conversation. So look, we'll change it up a little bit. So we've spent a lot of time talking about data in motion, how it flows from and to AI and across the web. But another side of the coin, and it's playing a massive issue for CISOs. And I'm going to contradict myself earlier on, talking new acronyms, right? But this is an acronym over the last 12 months I haven't heard as much people talking. DSPM, Data Security Posture Management.
So if we relate it back to shadow IT, getting visibility in a first instance is part of the challenge. And from a data protection perspective, historically, we'd always put up these little gates. You'd have a DLP rule. There'd be criteria in there. Anything that meets that criteria, we create an incident. We get visibility of. But we don't really natively have any discovery tools around there, which makes it really difficult. We have to guess, what are those little gates going to be? How big do they need to be? And we can't have them too big because we generate lots of incidents and we'll have lots of false positives. We'll flood our operations teams and we'll drown out all of the genuine high risk activity for want of just getting a larger visibility of what's going on. And this is really where DSPM comes in. So DSPM can gather information, to be fair, both in real time through proxy traffic, but especially through API integrations with cloud service providers. So Microsoft 365, Slack, GitHub. We've got over 45,000 different direct API integrations for sanctioned services that we can plug into and immediately get visibility of who's accessing what data. Of course, if we've classified that, we can assess the data risk and we can start drilling down into that. So immediately, once you've got this plugged in, once we've got some telemetry information within there, we can start delving into that and understanding from a risk perspective, who are the highest risk users accessing the highest risk information.
And it's complex, right? And I guess the context to that user, that data, that application is so key when we're looking at this.
Simplification is absolutely the key. Yeah, we can generate millions of events, of incidents. How do we manage all of those? And actually being able to have a really simple tool that you can drive to drill down into the most important information will help you generate, if you don't have one already, your data protection policies, or identify any gaps that you've got in there. And again, it just drives that cycle forward of a continual improvement.
And when we look at DSPM, I've seen numerous vendors that it's now arriving on many PowerPoint presentations and whiteboards,
Yes.
right? Is it a product or is it more of a process?
That's a good question. Personally, I see it fitting in with the whole data protection piece. It's a discovery tool. It forms part of your data protection process. So as we're going through the cycle of getting visibility, addressing the risk, tuning, and again, just going through that repeat process, DSPM is the key because it gives us a visibility of where we've lacked any controls before.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it is about that sort of conversation. I think goes back to that point of I wouldn't go into a customer and say, we're going to run through, DSPM. I think, it is conversational. It is a build up from where they are today. It helps them. And it is probably more about identifying, the pain and the value they're going to get from a solution like that. And to take them there rather than to expect people to sit down and take it on and then they're going to have to find the use cases, the problems they're addressing. I think go at it the other way, find the problems. If those problems are going to help them, then absolutely that's a fantastic way of sorting out some pretty serious problems and risks that companies have.
And risk is exactly it. So if we can just show you a dashboard where you can see what your greatest risks are. Have you got any sensitive information published in a S3 bucket that's public? That's probably one of your first places to start.
Yeah, it goes back to actually we've got a customer in the marketing space. I mentioned marketing. It's one of the less regulated markets, but I was talking to the CISO there, Dan. They take that information out. It's important that it gets, they know exactly where it is. The moment that it's public, if it's a marketing campaign, it has no value to it. But up till that point, it's critical that it's secured and no one can get access to it.
Look, it's definitely a key part of the journey and a key part of that platform. So I think it's a perfect opportunity really for us to try and bring all this together, the pull of the AI, browser security, DSPM together. That's where it is, right?
Absolutely.
And I guess what is the common thread if we look across these themes? Like, why are the point solutions failing? If we were going to like nail this down, and why should uh, an enterprise look at that single pane of glass? And I hate that term, but it's essentially what we're looking at here.
I mean, it's a fair point. You can take all these disparate solutions, and you can feed everything into your seam. But a lot of the certainly large enterprise customers I work with, there'll be a pushback against that. They've already got lots of data in their seam, and sure, there's a use case for that. We need that kind of correlation activity, but we don't need it everywhere. So taking, I guess, from an efficiency perspective, gathering all of those technologies into one piece becomes greater than the sum of all its parts. We can address the risks in whether it's your cloud service providers, whether it's that real-time traffic, whether it's even third-party contractor traffic. We can provide a set of protections around there that's really easy to implement, it's really easy to manage, and it reduces then the total cost of ownership.
Yeah, I think it is whether you have a number of point solutions today, or you're looking to have a single pane of glass. Our approach would always be around evolution of what you've got, rather than a revolution of ripping out and replacing that. That just doesn't work in this space, in all honesty. So it doesn't. That everyone's going to have a different approach, but I appreciate most customers are going to have a number of point solutions. I think going back to DSPM, it's that's a product that could really help if you have that. Yeah, tying it together.
Yeah, I think tying together that visibility, the control, the context is really where we're at. And I guess looking at our channel community, that offers a huge opportunity as well, right? Both in terms of meeting those customer needs, gaps in portfolios, but also consolidation, as we talked about. So I guess if we look at the channel opportunity, let's just touch on that. And why now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an enormous opportunity out there. Organizations have this pain, they are living it. It's if approached in a conversational way with key stakeholders that in your customers, you can really build up something that will give them confidence, that creates quite a prominent position for the channel community in their customers. And I mean, the main thing we really want to get across is we don't expect anyone to be, a Skyhigh expert or an SSE expert. Working together with Kite, we've got the ability to, with your technical expertise, with our backup, our innovation, we can really get our arms around, together with a channel partner, an approach that could be taken over potentially years of delivering, technology that will build on the next platform and the next platform, keeping our customers safe, efficient, and driving the business forward. So it's a great time. I don't know whether it's the right time. I wanted to sort of announce something, if it's okay, around.
Why not?
Go for it. Yeah. So I mean, what we would like to offer is the ability, working with Kite, to offer any customer the ability to have a shadow AI risk assessment. In that report, we'll be able to come into a customer together with the partner, identify and deliver a report to them, to the channel partner, that they can share with their customer to show where their risk is in the adoption of AI today. I don't know, Julian, if there's more we want to share about that, but it's an offer we want to make on this podcast today.
These are great conversations. So, I mean, this is something I've been doing for a number of years now. We know that just getting that visibility, like with DSPM, getting that visibility is absolutely key to start that journey. There's still a lot of our customers out there who probably less in the regulated industries, who don't have any of those controls in place. They don't have that visibility in place. We have a very simple process where we can get them that visibility. So it's quite a light touch engagement, but it gives them a massively rich report. It justifies the value of the product in a very similar way than that DSPM does. So this is quite a simple engagement with the customer. We can justify the cost of the product. We can mitigate that risk to the organization. And these conversations just, they build out over time. We don't necessarily expect the customer to have our technologies at day dot. Most of them, most of them don't, or they have certain pieces. And this is where, over a period of time, over a number of years, we can discuss with them the value of consolidating all of these technologies into one platform.
But that's a great tool, and from my side of things on that announcement, fantastic value that was mentioned there. I think if we look, it's really easy on a whiteboard in a PowerPoint presentation to kind of discuss these challenges and the opportunity that's there, but a tangible tool to highlight.
Very unusual.
Very unusual.
I mean, we are an insurance at the end of the day, and being able to very quickly and very easily demonstrate the value of the product is something that doesn't come along very, very often to us. So, we embrace it.
Totally. So the last piece I want to just touch on the channel before we start wrapping up is that, as we mentioned at the top of the podcast, Skyhigh Security have gone through various different guises. Skyhigh Networks, McAfee, Trellix, Skyhigh Security. If we were going to, if there's partners that are listening to this that have maybe been involved way back when, or joined and maybe gone away, maybe we've got some new partners as well in here, what can they expect of the Skyhigh Security team today? And, I think, Marcus, one for you, engaging with you and your region.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're highly motivated. I expect, the team to work with integrity with the channel partners. I think it's an important part of it. What we encourage our sales team to do is to build a team and agreement with the channel partner, because of the kind of conversations we want to have. It's going to, over a period of time, it's going to last potentially for years. So I think, it's super important that we build that close relationship. Working with Kite, you complement the additional services that we need to be able to look after channel partners. So I think it's very important that we have that opportunity working together with key partners. We want to manage and really focus our resources on partners, and we will provide them with the expertise to sell Skyhigh, and ask them to help us with the relationship, with the conversation with the customer, to uncover how we can develop a great relationship. So it's a major part. It's our critical. Only route to market.
We are 100% channel, so they are a critical part of our route to market. Without the channel, we have no means of selling to our customers.
And as Julian and myself said, as most people in the industry, we've also come from channels, so we know what a good quality relationship looks like. And I remember every vendor guy that I work with, what he did to help me, and I certainly remember where he didn't help me. And memories are long, and I think probably get the saying wrong, but it takes a long time to build credibility and relationships. It takes literally one small mistake to lose it.
Seconds to mess it up.
Seconds.
No, I love that. I really do. What a great way to finish that piece on the channel. No, I do love that term. Right then, so we've been talking for a while now, and we've covered so many topics, but I'm going to ask you both that, in terms of the key takeaways, and let's try and boil it down rather than we could talk for another hour.
Indeed.
But no, go on.
Yes.
So I'm going to ask you both, what's the key takeaway from you, Julian?
So I'm focusing in most of our conversations with our customers around that AI risk. Being able to provide that real-time protection, being able to secure other AI-type traffic through more than just traditional means, through enterprise browser with things like copy-paste control, printing controls, things that suits the endpoint. Securing against malware using our proxy servers, and having that control of the data, agnostic of any other controls, direct cloud to cloud, with one consistent set of controls. So it doesn't matter whether you're a contractor, it doesn't matter whether you're an employee, we will keep that secure data within your organization.
I think, from my perspective, obviously, we have we are the leader around actually delivering efficiency in this space. So, we'll lead and prove very high total cost, very low total cost of ownership, and really help customers protect investments they've made in Sky High or in other point products, so they can evolve to the challenges they face in 2026. And also as well, just going back to my takeaway is let's see if we can really get moving with a number of strategic but important shadow AI assessment reports together, and find those partners that want to work with a company like us and like Kite that can provide the expertise, but are people that are willing to go out and have the conversation with customers.
Perfect. Well, look, Marcus, Julian, I really enjoyed that, and I think from my side, just to reiterate some of the themes that we've talked about and how to engage with Kite: the AI risk, data first security, unified visibility and control, and then that huge partner opportunity as well, which all of those three things bring. So if you're a partner here for me, make contact with myself or your Kite account manager. Let's really look at some of those AI assessments. I'd love to see some of those in play, and maybe when we get together again, be able to take a look at some of those and some real user cases, right? Some Sky High demos. And I think, like you said, let's just spark some conversations. Let's spark some conversations, spark some interest. And I don't think it's going to take too much, given the stats and the market that's out there, for our partners
They're always good conversations.
They're going to uncover some opportunity pretty quickly, right?
Absolutely.
Right. So before I stop the podcast and in terms of hitting the final button, I always ask the guests before we go one last question. Anna, who would you like to see in your seat? Who would you recommend for us to get a guest on? I always wait till the end to ask this.
I'm going to have to call out the Trellix team. So Trellix is, we're two separate entities, but they are still our sister company. We have synergy in the solutions we can offer customers, especially around things like DLP, but more than that as well. And we also obviously share a CEO, so it's going to have to be Trellix for me.
How about yourself?
I go from a customer's perspective, and so it's difficult to name many names. But we spend a lot of our time trying to understand their pains, and I think there's certainly some key people within many of our customers I'd love to see in this seat who can say how we've been on a journey to help them get to where they are at the moment.
Totally love that. So once again, thanks very much, guys. Hope to have you back in the studio again sometime soon, right?
Love to.
Thank you.
Thanks for the invite.
I've been Stuart Nairn Clark, the host of the Kite Channel Lounge. Thank you very much for joining us. And please check out the podcast on the various channels found on Spotify and YouTube. See you again.